welcome to the Josh Matlow in brief section. So essentially what we're going to do is go through Josh Matlow's policies, analyze what he's talking about and what he's proposing. This is cut from the longer form 1 hour and 40 minutes, so this isn't anything you're missing out if you've already watched the 1 hour and 40-minute content. But this is essentially just a section of that if you're interested solely in Josh Matlow. So similar to the Mark Saunders piece, we're going to start with an introduction, then followed by a policy summary, and then my own personal observations regarding Josh Matlow. So Josh Matlow has a relatively long history in municipal politics. He was the Toronto City Councillor for Ward 12. He used to be a TDSB trustee. He was previously endorsed by the Toronto Star Board in 2010, 2014, 2018, 2022, and he labels himself as a pragmatic progressive. For further information regarding him as a person, feel free to check out his campaign website and also Wikipedia for his own personal life and that kind of thing. That's not going to really be the intention of this video. It's to give an overview as to who is Josh Matlow. So essentially we've got a city councillor who is now vying for the position of mayor of Toronto. One of his big policy items is the $115 million community fund that's going to be funded from stabilize the annual police budget at $1.16 billion for 3 years. So the goal here is to maintain the police budget as is for 3 years, and then using that extra money that would have gone to the police budget to instead create a community fund. The idea behind this is to address the risk factors that then lead to criminal behavior, and then this will then lead to other policy changes that he's doing, such as open schools and community level support and things like that. I think overall this makes a lot of sense in terms of, we need to address the root causes that lead to criminality, rather than solely trying to treat the symptom over and over again. If we can try and nip it at the bud as early as possible, that would lead to cost savings in the future, safer cities, and just an overall improvement in the quality of life. So I think overall this is a good idea. I think just more specifics I think we'll get into regarding how that's going to be spent will be important. Regarding Ontario Place, his main goal is to actually oppose the therm spa that's going to be built in Ontario Place, according to the Doug Ford government. And his plan to do this is to really withhold the city land from the spa. I'm not sure the effectiveness of this. So, for example, I assume that he's going to attempt to, maintain this as city property, therefore denying some of the land to the therm group. I'm not sure if that's actually going to lead to the therm group not building the spa, or if by withholding this land, the therm group will just build a spa here, and then later on they'll connect through the government to this. Because the issue with Ontario Place is that since this is an artificial island territory kind of thing, it belongs to the Ontario government since it was created by the Ontario government. So Matlow doesn't really have much jurisdiction as mayor over this territory, but I assume he's talking about this. But I don't know if this withholding this territory is going to prevent all of this being built when it's all connected through here. That is all Ontario provincial territory. So we'll see what that is, or if that's merely just politics. He wants to establish public build Toronto. So essentially the goal of this is to develop housing on city-owned lands. The idea of this is to fund it with $300 million in seed funding from the city that would then be sourced from the Gardner rebuild. So the eastern section of the Gardner is going to be, or under his mayoralty, would be rebuilt as a ground level boulevard instead of the above kind of skyway that we're seeing right now. And the money saved from that ground level rebuild, which is apparently $500 million, $300 million of that would then go towards building these market apartments, affordable apartments, and the ratio of that would be 10% 3-bedroom, 20% 2-bedroom, and the rest would be 1-bedroom, that kind of thing. And the idea of this is to be, self-sustaining to some degree. So $60 million generated annually for new construction. And the idea is to, create some buildings, get some affordability up, increase the housing supply. So these are a lot of the invisible, quote-unquote, invisible policies that he's going to bring in. This isn't like the big transit projects or big buildings that are coming. These are more agencies and things that are, programs that you may or may not interact with unless you really need them. So things like, increasing the funding to purchase affordable apartment buildings under threat so they can be run by nonprofit or co-op operators. So it's not necessarily new buildings going up, but under new management. Going after illegal renovations and landlord-owned use evictions. Requesting police investigations of incidents of landlord fraud. Increase funding for paralegal to fight unfair above guideline increases. Increase funding for the Toronto Tenant Support Program. Form a building permits team to investigate if application for eviction has been filed. So this is a lot of just handling the illegality or sometimes, the suspicious behavior of certain landlords. And I assume the idea behind this is to really create and beef up a lot of those programs. So not only creating, physical buildings, but also additional, bureaucracy that will hopefully lead to improvements in quality of life. So overall, I think this makes sense. Selling this to the voter might be a bit challenging because it's hard to see programs and things in action until you actually use them. But I think these things are essential for a functional city, and we'll see a decline in suspicious landlords in the future if these kind of things go up and everything goes according to plan. And this is exactly how it is. So overall, I think just this seems to be fun. This is just more of the same. This isn't necessarily new stuff. This is just increasing funding to current things that are working. So RentSafe is essentially creating rental guides and rental signs similar to the Dine Safe program. So the Dine Safe program has green, yellow, and red signs. Green meaning pass, yellow meaning conditional pass with fixing some stuff, and red meaning the restaurant is shut down. In terms of how that's going to work, if a landlord gets a red pass, is questionable. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. But the other stuff that he's going to do to improve rent safety, which currently helps bylaw officers and sends them out to ensure that landlords are following the regulations, is that he will mandate for landlords to install heavy duty screens to provide protections for falls, but allow for windows to be fully opened. I'm not sure what heavy duty screen is strong enough currently, to be able to open all the way fully, while also a child could push up against it and not fall out, apart from bars on windows. But I don't think anyone wants bars on their windows, so I'm not sure how this is going to work per se. This is again just more bylaw stuff, which is under the purview of the mayor, and that's fine. 26 degrees, allow windows to high rise open more than 10 centimeters, things like that. Increasing fines on landlords. This is all stuff that the mayor can do. The interesting thing here is also hire contractors to fix boilers or pest infestations. So essentially not leaving it up to the landlord to fix it, but the landlord has a certain amount of time, and then the city sends them in and then sends them the bill, I assume. So I think as a whole of taking more action as a city, I think this makes a lot of sense. Things like this seem kind of minor, and relatively they are fairly minor. Compared to like build new transit projects or new buses and things like that. But this is within the purview of the mayor, and this is perfectly fine. Just needs more conditions on what's going to happen if someone doesn't pass, and what happens if someone gets a green. What if a landlord sues? If they get a yellow and you're like, no, my house is perfectly fine. Now I'm losing income because of this. I'm sure there's contingencies available, and there's stuff we can learn from the Dine Safe program. But I think this just needs a bit more emphasis, more focus. So the open schools idea is essentially to use money from the $150 million community fund, if we remember from the first slide, and use the schools as community centers on evenings and weekends. I think this makes a lot of sense. A lot of schools are ideal neighborhoods surrounded by homes, and students know where they are. They're relatively safe spaces. So instead of investing more money into building new community centers, why don't we use the existing community centers that kind of sit idle over the course of the weekend? And this is a good back and forth. We know the TDSP is a little bit cash poor, so having the city inject more money into the TDSP could be a good symbiotic effect in terms of improving the quality of schools and really improving the respect for schools in neighborhoods, and realizing that schools are an important fixture of the community. So I think overall this makes a lot of sense within the purview of the mayor. Relatively cheap according to this, 1 million open schools. I think seeing all schools being open all the time, I think would be fantastic, and I think would open up a lot of opportunity and it would be a unique opportunity for young Torontonians to engage with their community and get busy and do things and not have to resort to just walking around on the street trying to find something to do. There's always a community hub to go to study, a safe space, things like that. I think this makes a lot of sense. So the Toronto Public Library, the idea behind this is to open all 100 branches on Sundays, be funded by $1.5 million from the $150 million Community Health and Safety Fund. And 70% of Torontonians use the library system. So essentially the idea behind this is that since the Toronto Public Library is one of the most successful public library systems in the world, continuing to build on the TPL, building on the open schools, building on the community fund, this is essentially create a network of community hubs across the city that students can, and young people and members of the community can always dip into to find a safe space, to read a book, to study, to hang out, things like that I think is important. I think we're losing a lot of third spaces, so spaces that you don't necessarily have to pay to be in, spaces you can just hang out and meet people in. I think this is an excellent idea overall. I'm always in favor of increasing funding to libraries and schools. I think it's fantastic. So the climate crisis, he wants to invest $200 million in new money to accelerate Toronto's progress towards net zero GHG emissions. It's things like electrifying the vehicle fleet and TTC buses. The concern here is it says all new residential commercial construction have to be run off electrical energy by 2028. I'm not sure what that means. Does he mean that, the drills and the sanders and all those tools have to be using electrical energy? But, far as I understand, they already do use electrical energy. For example, the diesel generators on site now have to be powered by solar panels to generate electricity? What do you mean by construction has to be run off of electrical energy? Or does it mean the buildings themselves have to be electrical and not be fossil fuel? So the heating in the buildings has to not be natural gas, but electrical. But that's more of a provincial issue because that determines on our energy supply and our energy mix, which currently is majority nuclear and hydro. So we would need to reduce the cost of nuclear and hydro in order to make, being powered by electricity for heating to be viable like it is in Quebec. So I think there needs to be more clarity on what this means. I'm not sure if this is within the purview of the mayor of Toronto. This can be enacted as a policy, but I don't know how effective that's going to be and what it really means. Lower fares, sure, but how? Using what money? How are we going to get funding? Is the Toronto? Are we going to fully fund the TTC finally? What's going to happen? Requiring all taxis and ride-sharing vehicles to be electric by 2030. So, how are we going to enforce that? How do we make sure that Uber, Lyft, all these other companies follow the rules? Taxis are a bit easier to enforce, medallions and that kind of thing. Only issue medallions to new electrical vehicles and, kind of phase out the old ICE vehicles, that kind of thing. But with ride-sharing vehicles, they're often private cars that are, people use on their off time. So I'm not sure how that is going to be enforced. Do we, what if an Uber from Pickering that is an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine, drives into Toronto, and does that mean they can't actually operate as a rideshare vehicle in Toronto? Does that mean there's an electric bubble around Toronto? Unless you drive an electric vehicle, you can't be an Uber driving into Toronto. I think more clarity on how that works would be useful. So transport again makes a lot of sense here. So two key things: TTC, road design, increasing more funding to the TTC. The road design, I think, is also very important. Toronto is often plagued with these huge, massive roads here. So this is an example of Midland and Sheppard. Midland and Sheppard has a gigantic intersection here, and this is often one of the most dangerous intersections in the city. As Matlow notes, 98 out of 100 of the city's most dangerous roads are in Scarborough and North York. Lucky us. But the only real way to fix these is through proper road design. The reason why people go so quickly is because the roads are so wide, so people feel a lot more secure and safe going faster down these roads, and it gives you the impression that you need to go faster because your depth perception, all of that. So if you make these roads smaller, so for example, bike lanes, barriers, that kind of stuff, more cafe kind of seating, that kind of thing, that could slow down the roads. Proper pedestrian crossing, safety barriers, all that kind of stuff. So I think that would need quite a lot of funding too. We need a specific plan on how that's going to work. But overall, I think that makes sense. If our goal is to make, cars slow down, we need to follow those principles of road design. So the green belt is another idea that he's had. So his idea is to rally the municipal leaders that are in this region. The green is the green belt, the orange is these developments, cities and things like that. So essentially intervened at the court level at the OLT where Toronto's interests are threatened. Focus on environmental protection work and a procurement policy to avoid buying new sand and gravel from the green belt. And the goal of the green belt is to really protect a lot of our waters and forests, so the quality of our land, soil, and water is protected. And currently, I think under the Ford government, they want to open up parts of the green belt for more development. So yeah, I think we're going to need to look into exactly how that's going to work. And personally, I'm in favor of it. I think we need to densify housing rather than doing more urban sprawl. That's not really going to solve anything. And this is some of the best land in the country. We don't have a lot of fertile land. So I think we should protect the fertile land that we do have, and the forests and the nature and the rivers that we do have to improve the quality of life, to ensure that we have clean water. We don't end up, like in other places of the world, we're polluting in these places of nature and end up impacting, cities down the line, people down the line as well. Water is important. We should protect it. So the Scarborough Moves plan is interesting. I think, Scarborough is relatively underserved by transit, so he wants to do a $1.2 billion commitment of network of public transit routes, cycling, and walking trails to improve the quality of life. I think this is essential for Scarborough to be deeper integrated with the rest of the city, and for Scarborough to be a viable, area for people to buy housing, to then perhaps commute into the city, or to become its own city center or area of interest. And this would open up housing affordability, densification, allow more housing supply to come in. If transit can get there, you don't necessarily need a car. It allows more people to move in, all that kind of stuff. It'll just improve the quality of life in Scarborough as a whole. So the idea here is the Eglinton East LRT. So down here, 23 stops from Kennedy to Malvern Town Center. Huge LRT system that should connect southern and this kind of spine of Scarborough here. The Shepherd East LRT, so we're looking at stuff over here. So that's, again, fantastic in terms of just like making this box of availability and this box of potential. And the Scarborough Rapid Busway, so this is going to connect until the subway gets built in 2030. And the idea here is to facilitate movement of people from here down to Kennedy in 15 minutes, to ensure that people go as quick as possible, so Scarborough remains viable. So you don't need a car. We can increase affordability, all that kind of stuff. So I think overall this makes sense. Growing cities need more transit. Growing cities cannot rely on cars and single family housing. We need to densify. We need to have more opportunities for transit. You shouldn't have to own a car if you live in the city in order to survive or make it to work. Overall, I think I like Josh Matlow quite a lot. He's got a lot of detailed plans. I think he needs a lot better marketing, though. He's currently losing to Chow and Saunders, and I think mainly because Chow has got that NDP association from Jack Layton at the NDP party, and Saunders has the endorsement from Doug Ford. So I think Matlow needs to improve more on his marketing, and his team needs to get the message more out there. Yeah, I think a lot of stuff that he's doing is within the purview of mayor. There's not a ton there that's like, well, this is conditional on the federal government liking us, this is conditional on the provincial government liking us, which means you can hold them directly accountable if things aren't done. Because you can say, well, look, you promised to do this, this is within your powers, you've not done this, how come? And I think that's important. Like I said before, it seems like he's got the most detailed plans in terms of covering housing and transit and culture and community and all the things that a city needs to survive. He's not focused on silly kind of political issues, silly culture war stuff, or, things that shouldn't take the priority, like focusing on bike lanes over transit, or bike lanes over community features, or bike lanes over like whatever. And same thing, like he's just got more detailed ideas than Chow. Chow lacks a lot in the transit department. Her focus is on housing, but really leaning into nonprofits and that kind of thing. Matlow's got a good mix of building new housing, nonprofits, taking advantage of old housing, taking advantage of the space that we currently have. And I think his experience as councillor, in the actual machinations of the Toronto municipal government is going to be important in helping him navigate, how the government actually works, what he needs to do to get things passed, and his relatively connections within the government, I think, are going to be extremely useful. So he just needs better marketing, and I think a better team to help him get through this kind of glut of Sanders and Chow endorsements. I think he needs some really solid endorsements from himself, and I think he needs some really good media time, and I think he's got some solid ideas, and he should really try and push forward with them.